आणि यानंतर थेट आपण जाणार आहोत अर्थमंत्री निर्मला सीतारामन यांच्या विशेष मुलाखतीत.
Farm equipment manufacturing areas are quite comfortable with what is going on in the rural market. It's not as if demand has affected them. So people are purchasing equipments to do their tilling or farming activities. That's one. I'm not just talking about tractors, but even the other equipments which go in. One. And second, also rural demand, which is FMCG related or your daily consumption related items. Your GST revenues, whilst I don't want to say that revenue GST going up is purely on rural, it may be urban and rural, but it means that it cannot be maintaining a sustained level if one of the segments, rural or urban, really fall down drastically. So I don't think it's worrisome, if at all, any drop.
The RBI governor says that the worst of inflation is behind us. So can the RBI then take a more relaxed view of monitoring, tightening and support growth in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I realize that if I do comment, it will look as if I'm guiding the RBI or anything like that.
No, broadly speaking.
But I suppose, yes, the way in which inflation has come down, both by RBI's action and by the government's action, and the government's action has been steady and at it for some time. So I expect, since the fall in the inflation, it doesn't seem to be just a momentary or a 1 month affair. It should sustain itself in the process of coming down, and therefore they should, and you're right, therefore there shouldn't be that much pressure on the central bank to keep the pace of increasing the rates. So, but the MPC will take a call.
Of course. Any concern that you feel is there because of the twin deficit problems?
It's not as severe as before.
Yes.
Yes, when exports come down, you're going to have the current account deficit. But it's also now suddenly going up as well as it was before, a couple of months ago, one. And second is also the import. Imports also keep slightly going up sometimes, but it's also coming down. If these two factors are primarily the ones which we have to concern ourselves with, monthly fluctuations I say.
Yes.
Fluctuation should not worry us, but if every month there is a steady decline and there doesn't seem to be a sign of increase or coming upward, uptick as you would say, if there is no chance of an uptick predicted in the next few months, then I think I should worry. But monthly looking at coming down and going up need not worry us so seriously.
Okay. So next year the centre and states will spend rupees 13.7 lakh crore as capital expenditure. By any account, it's a phenomenal number. Capacity utilization in the manufacturing sector is at about 72%. My question is, when do you think that the private sector will enter this virtuous cycle of capital spending?
They are in it already, I would think.
There has been a minor uptick.
But I've been explaining this. I'm not sure if industry is explaining it as much, but I read it. So I keep read it in the sense my inferences based on the kind of discussions which happen. India's industry, the old India industry as well as the new, which is the IT related industry, software and so on, both old India industry and this are transitioning also with the energy related matters, are transitioning also in the way in which their shop floors are operated. So the investment that they make is not to create one more unit of what they already have. The investment that they have to make, and therefore the conscious decision that they have to take, will now also look at not just expanding existing capacity the way it is, but also looking at bringing high technology, Web3, robotics, 3D printing and so on. So that together with moving towards more renewable energy use, making a green product of what they are making. For instance, steel industry is facing huge barriers in Europe. Now, their business of having to invest and expand now would be not to just produce more steel, but to produce green steel. So the investment there has 3 new dimensions which have never been into consideration earlier. Invest and produce green, produce also with the efficiencies of technology. So all this, when comes into play, when your decision making is being done, does take time and more resources. So I would want to give that advantage for India's private sector, that yes, their process is going to be somewhat more complicated in terms of taking the decision, but I think the atmosphere is conducive for that on all grounds, technology, green and so on.
I'm kind of curious that while you've given a boost to capital expenditure and increased outlay to PM Vikas Yojana, you've also cut the Manrega budget by almost 33% or 30,000 crore. Why have you done that?
Actually, the answer lies in your own question.
Okay.
PM Vikas Yojana is also to be done by workers in the area, rural area, who normally would have gone for, let us say, in the absence of this, would have gone for Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Right. That's one answer, because even this has got to be done by people in the rural areas who are looking for jobs, just as Jal Jeevan Mission also goes through rural works. So they have these opportunities as well, which are coming not in a small incremental change, 6% increase, 79,000 crores for PM Awas, and also Jal Jeevan also getting a huge allocation. So these two also are there along with me. Second, Manrega is a demand-driven scheme. The more people come saying we want the job, we give them the work. So what is stated at the budget time estimate tends to keep adding to its resources or demands based on what comes from states. I need more. Then we add more to it and go to the parliament with a supplementary demand. So if you see the last 3 to 4 years, inclusive of the COVID year, naturally, yes, the BE number and the RE numbers are so different in that the RE is much higher. And if you now go back to the last 2 years where the actual numbers are available, BE, RE and the actuals, you will see the actuals are lots more than the BE, and in some cases exactly as much as the RE, which is enhanced, or even better than the RE in increased amount when you realize it in the actuals. So you end up spending a lot more even as you're going on. So I'm a bit now worried that this is becoming a staid question. Manrega, you cut it. Just see the pattern for the last 3 years. It starts with a number at the BE, keeps going on because it's demand driven, and when the supplementary demand stage comes, it's actually a lot more.
Yes. So more opportunities have been created, so that's
right.
Yeah, so I agree. The real average GDP growth rate is 6.5%, as the economic survey says. With a little more reforms, the survey posits that it could even be a little higher at 7 to 8%. Now, what is the realistic and the desirable sort of growth rate for India if it were to become, the 3rd largest economy in the world by the end of this decade?
Desirable is one thing, but that desirable number will have to be tempered down by the global realities. Yes. The kind of uncertainties with every economy in the world faces. I don't think any one economy is so immune that the global volatilities don't affect them. So every economy is affected, particularly for a country like India, which for at least 2 critical items entirely depends on imports: fuel, fertilizer. So when you're looking at importing that many big ticket items, your uncertainties are lots more and lots more pronounced. But even provisioning for that and building a budget, we have definitely ensured that we will be not as much be affected by such uncertainties as would any other country be. And therefore, the numbers that we've given for the growth is very realistic.
Right. You know, one thing that struck me this time when I was listening to your budget speech was the absence of any mention of disinvestment or asset monetization. Why was that? You know, why has that at least seeming to take a backseat in the last year or so?
No, it is still there in the budget documents.
Right.
It may not have been a part of my speech, but it is in the appendix to the speech. It's also in the rest of the documents where we give the actual numbers and the activities which are going on and so on. See, the cabinet has after all taken a call that certain companies will have to be privatized, and that motion has the approval of the authority concerned, which is the cabinet. So the process goes on. But of course, because we'll have to also see when is the best time for it to be done, given the fact that we've already done the homework and kept it ready for just going out to the market, this consumes a lot of time, this preparatory time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Post that is when we literally watch out for the market and then put it out. So both the factors, preparation and best time in the market, influence when you put it out. The process is on many of these items.
So you're saying it's a question of timing. The commitment to privatization remains as strong as
Absolutely, particularly on those where the cabinet has already given the go-ahead.
So last year you'd spoken about the privatization of 2 PSU banks. What happened to that? Have you identified the banks? Is the process on?
This is what is happening. The process is on. The amendments will have to happen in the Act, right. And then also look at the market, and then it'll have to go through.
So it is very much on.
Of course, it's on, because the cabinet has given the approval.
Right. So, Nirmala ji, the export sector is suffering because of slowdown in major markets. What are the options to mitigate the impact of weak international economies for us today?
See, it has two-sided problem. One, you have to make up for those handicaps that Indian exporters face, whether in logistics, whether it is the cost of electricity, or whether it is any other inherent handicap that they may have in terms of labor, or in terms of the place they are located in, and so on. So for these inefficiencies because of certain handicaps, it is necessary to give them some kind of a redressal, in the sense give them some incentive, or the RODTEP like scheme which is already on. So that's one thing. But it's also the usual way in which you would say, if a market is difficult, look for newer markets. If a market is difficult, see what you want to do about making yourself attractive for that market. You do road shows, or you spend money in branding yourself, or you appoint such agents who will tell us about the tastes in that and preferences in that market, and so on. And looking for another market, you will obviously spend some money and go on road shows, open up avenues there. But today, the typical problem that you face, not just you, meaning Indian exporters, but many face, is the lack of demand in those markets because of recession, which are normally our marketplaces where we send our products, whether it's your textile, whether it is your diamonds, whether it's your gems and jewelry, whether it is your tea, whether it's your basmati rice, and so on. So I'm taking those which are symbolic of India. There are others, components, auto components, electronic parts, which you very well manufacture today. So when the recession has hit these economies, and when I say these economies, not just those in which you're present, but even for the newer markets which you might otherwise aim at, all of them are hit by it. So that's where the problem gets even more compounded, and we'll have to work together with the exporters to see how best we can help it.
Okay. India's trade deficit with China has hit $100 billion in 2022, $100 billion in 2022. Imports keep rising, exports to China are falling. Is this situation acceptable to us? How do we really reverse this trend?
No country would want its exports to languish and imports to balloon with any trading partner. But the issue has two-pronged answers. We should be conscious not to have to consume things which come, overly from only one destination. But that doesn't mean I'm imposing any view. We should also be conscious of buying it from elsewhere if it is necessary at all. And for India's exports, it has to also look at ways in which market can be expanded in that territory or in any other geographical jurisdiction. So it is always a twin game. It's like a pair of scissors. You have to look at both the sides.
What do you make of this growing clamor, especially in some opposition ruled states like Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, to bring back the old pension scheme? In fact, Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Devendra Fadnavis ji, has also spoken about this. He said he'll look into the matter. What is the government's view on this?
See, when I talk about government's view, I don't want to speak as though this government view or that government's view. Who, after all, implemented it for the first time? After the decisions were taken at different layers of officialdom, the political dispensations which brought this in was not just NDA. UPA was actively those who brought it forward. The entire question of introduction of OPS, new pension scheme, was during the Congress's period. They didn't at that time talk about rollback. They didn't at that time talk about any, bringing the old system back or anything of that. So now, if without adequate looking into of what it means, are we paying the current generation of pensioners by loading it onto the future generation? And how far, because in government the arguments will quickly come back to you saying, but when government borrows, it's also leaving a burden on the future generation and so on. But that's the argument. Would we all look at what is a reasonable balance? Would we look at what is it that we are leaving for our generations to come? Yes, you will have to have an economy running, you will borrow to a certain extent. But unless we have a complete understanding of this, the fiscal implication, the fiscal health of the state, not just today, for the next decades, to rush to a conclusion may not be. Right. And I was glad to hear in one of the book release programs that I attended, Sri Montek Singh Aluwalia talk about it. It's not I'm taking up something which emerged out of a private conversation. Right. In a book release, publicly, when asked, he did respond. So it's not as if now we are talking on political lines. We have to talk on Indian economy, its strength, not just Indian economy as Government of India, but every state's economy, and then take a call on it.
That's right. Let's move on to the personal tax front. I think it is one thing that has really wowed everyone, wowed the middle class, your core vote bank also of the BJP. You want, obviously, people to move to the new tax regime. So by when will you then look at phasing out 80C and 80D deductions? Because, that's really the core of investments, healthcare. When will this happen? What is your time frame to sort of move to the new tax regime entirely?
No, I'm not given myself a time frame. I'm more looking at it to make sure every Indian citizen makes his own choice, her choice. It's one thing for me to say I'm bringing in a better system, which is going to be less complicated, in fact, least complicated, which also is going to give you a rate which is going to be reasonable for each one of our levels of income, and make it attractive, therefore, for compliance and also for the rate. I pay less tax there. But it's another thing to have a system which is going on, where unfortunately I don't want to criticize anybody. Unfortunately, the impression is I have so many exemptions given, which incentivizes me to save for insurance cover, for medical cover, for even saving for better interest earning that I can have, and so on. I don't want people there to think that I've denied them that. Please if you want to have it that way. But it's not just one government or the other. In general, the philosophy that governed it was you'll have all those exemptions and you'll feel tempted to have yourself cover, insurance cover, give yourself insurance cover or savings or whatever. But your tax rates were so high. Yes. So it's nice to give you some incentives, but good enough for me to have a big return in terms of the tax that I collect. Yeah. But whereas what I'm giving you now, which was introduced 2 years ago, this is the second regime, and Prime Minister was very clear that taxpayers should know actually what they're paying and exactly feel comforted that they're not paying much, and actually bring in rates down, make it simple so that anyone sitting at home should be able to file their returns and know, and that's the end of the story. I don't need to keep immense documents and so on. So we brought that in, and steadily we are making it attractive, but not forcing anybody to get out of the exemption regime. But the fact remains there that the rates have been very high and you still got some discounts so that you can go with your...
So how many people do you think will migrate? Any sense that the government has?
I'm more talking about the layers which are covered
yes.
by these beneficial tax rates. I would think in that layer at least 50% will come
50%. That's a big number. And what is the current number? Any idea that the government has of that?
Yeah, I have a number, but I don't think I can off the cuff say it.
Okay. This is a slightly broader question. You've been extremely successful in widening the tax base. As the base has widened, the tax slabs tend to go down. Do you think that could you consider in the long run bringing the top tax slab to 25%, just in line with your corporate tax rate, top corporate tax rate? Would that be the vision going forward?
Well, eventually the tax rates must be absolutely low and the assessee friendly. Citizens cannot be burdened with taxation. But that is when I've widened my base sufficiently. It can't be that few people pay and they pay huge amounts and I have to run the system. It shouldn't be that. It should definitely be wider the base, lower the tax, and therefore achieve both the objectives of collect your tax from those who can pay it, but collect enough so that you are able to run your schemes.
The new income tax regime, there is a feeling that it disincentivizes savings. How do you react to that?
I gave you the logic.
Yeah.
I can always incentivize you, go for insurance, go for savings, go for this, and come up with a fantastically high rate and say, all right, I've given you discounts, but I need my money. Instead, I'd prefer a completely acceptable and lower rate of interest, lower tax rate, and people to feel that, all right, I'm not being burdened, there's no reason for me to avoid or evade the tax and pay it up.
नेटवर्क 18चे एडिटर इन चीफ राहुल जोशी यांच्या प्रश्नांना दिलखुलासपणे अर्थमंत्री निर्मला सीतारामन उत्तर देताना दिसतात. यानंतर इथे वेळ झाली ब्रेकची. ब्रेक घेऊयात. पहा फक्त न्यूज 18 लोकमत.